everybody, Excited Utterance here. My name's Hella, and today's a big day. I know I say that a lot. I'm always like, oh yeah, today's a really important day. Today's a really great day. Today is the day I've been waiting for a really long time. No offense to all of my other regular guests, but this guest I have been definitely waiting to have on, and the day is finally here, everybody. I know, because look at everyone in chat, they're all lit up. Hi everybody. I'm gonna just say a few hellos. Hey Melissa Simok, so excited about this stream. Yes, I know. Rachel, hi. Erica Thorpe, hi. DB, you have been hyping things up over on X and everything. Hello. Oh my god, this is my favorite song. It can't be your favorite song. I'm bored of it. I'm gonna change it. It can't be. You loony. Taryn is here. Hello, crypto tax lawyer. How's it going? Yes, I do dancing. So if you are a member, you get to see some of the dancing. It's Brazilian Zouk, but you have to be a member. Dali, no, Ilya, how are you? Sub-only mode? I'm not in sub-only mode. Am I? Since when am I in sub-only mode? I didn't change it. Okay. All right. Well, I'm in sub-only mode. There you go. And yeah, Steph JK, how are you? Right, guys, I won't make you wait any longer. Am I really in sub-only mode? Or is he just saying that? Beautiful Waterfall is present. Hello. No BE only sub. Oh god, you people, you try and get me all worried about nothing. Next thing you're gonna say I'm muted, and I'm not muted. I know that because I tested it with Andrea. Hello, Andrea. Oh, you're muted.
Oh.
No, you're not anymore. I fixed it.
Hi, Hella. Hi, chat.
See, they play with me, right?
They will do that. That's why I have you helping me behind the scenes, because it's just too hard for me to play sometimes.
I know, right? Like they do. Like seriously, I just got to ignore it. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Everything is muted, Justin. Everything is not muted. Okay, stop. Stop. Right? Stop. There's so much love for you in the chat right now, Andrea. So much love for you everywhere.
Thanks,
this lady here right now, and I tell you what, Andrea, I'm not going to do the whole congrats on all the subs and all that kind of thing, because I know that's not the most important thing for you. What I do want to just do is say thank you for all of the sleep that you've given up. All of the the sore butt time that you must have had. Like how sore must your butt be after sitting in that courtroom all that time? And whatever it is you're on, lady, can I have some, please? I just don't know how you did that.
Hunger for justice is a hell of a drug.
Right. Yeah, so thank you, and I'm sure on behalf of everybody in chat as well, thank you for what you just did. That was a huge undertaking.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. It was, it's obviously a very important case. Public access is an issue that I've been an advocate for quite a long time. Something I think is really important. We've seen too many situations where the mainstream media just can't be relied on to report things accurately or, frankly, honestly sometimes. So I knew this was going to be something where we needed independent eyes in the courtroom, and I was going to do whatever it took to be those eyes.
Yeah, exactly. So, Andrea, now that we know what the outcome is, I mean, I know it was a gut punch for a lot of us. I'm sure it was for you as well. And were you outside the courtroom when the verdict happened, or
I was in the courtroom?
Oh, you were there, right? Yes. Okay. So when it happened, there's a lot of disbelief, I think, for a lot of us. I remember Jeff, your husband, in our group chat was just like, and I need a little bit of Andrea soothing talk right now, as we all do, because it was a few hours between the verdict and you coming on stream.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of other people were commentating at the time. It it was it was a bit unbelievable, but then it also was, I guess, when you think about it, it also wasn't unbelievable,
Mm-hmm.
was it? Because these things happen all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they really do. And it was a situation where I wanted to be shocked. I really did, but I just can't be. It's far too often where juries want to convict, or they're inclined to convict, or they just don't accept that basic premise that it's
Mm.
better for 10 guilty to go free than one innocent man to be unjustly imprisoned. Um,
Yeah.
it's just, unfortunately, a lot of the times the jury prefers to err on the side of concluding that they did it, or that they probably did it, and that that's good enough, which of course is not the legal standard. Um, but getting a
No,
jury to really incorporate that and internalize it is a real uphill battle a lot of the times.
exactly. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, because uh, it took me a day or so, but I went live 24 hours later, and I just had like a giant, big decompressed rant about the fact that I'm tired of this happening. I'm tired of juries just not understanding what beyond a reasonable doubt means, and how is there any way of fixing it? It just seems so rare for a person to be found not guilty today.
Mm-hmm.
And I I want to, okay, before we get into things, I want to actually ask you to pull no punches and tell me, you sat there in the courtroom, was there a lawyer that put on a better job, like put on a better show for the jurors, painted a more compelling picture? Was there one that we didn't see it? We didn't see the back and forth.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
theatrics matters.
It does, and there was very much a lot of back and forth in this case. That was part of the challenge of it, was that, one day the prosecution would be having an absolutely phenomenal case, and you'd think, oh my gosh, there's no way the defense is going to come back from this, and then the next day the defense has an absolutely phenomenal
Mm,
day, and you're
yeah.
thinking there's no way the prosecution is going to recover from that either.
Mm,
Overall, I mean, I do have to give credit to Mr. McClelland. He does have a theatrical presentation and a style of presentation that comes across as very confident. I think to somebody who is a critical thinker, it's not necessarily that compelling, because what he does is he just like makes assertions at you what you should believe, but he doesn't go through the process of explaining why. He doesn't
yeah.
actually like address the evidence that supports the factual claim he wants the jury to suggest to adopt.
Yeah.
So, like, for me, sitting in the audience listening, I don't find it very compelling. But for a jury, particularly if a jury is already kind of inclined to think, well, I'm suspicious of this guy because here he is sitting in court.
Mm,
I'm suspicious of this guy because I don't like how he looks, or just, any one of those things that can come into a play in a criminal case.
yes.
He gave them plenty to be able to hang their hats on, and unfortunately there were just some aspects of the case that I think, from a factual standpoint, the defense found it difficult to overcome. The whole last minute assertion of this white van, and how the white van is something only that the killer would know, and not really being prepared to be able to counter that with what we now know is like actually quite a lot of social media conversation going on about white vans. But that's just part of what happens in trial, particularly when you have very late developing information, like we did this
Mm,
whole, new interview with Brad Weber.
yes. Was the white van, and the fact that that would have been quite easy, that information to have gotten through to Richard Allen, was
Mhm.
that argued? I'm sorry if I missed it, but was that argued by the defense that he could have known, that could have been fed to him?
So only kind of by implication. They didn't present any like independent evidence of, okay, here's examples where the white van was in discovery, or where the white van was in the social media, or where, Dr. Walla participated in white van conversations, or anything like that. So they didn't really address it on that type of factual standpoint, and that means they were left with it was Brian Harshman, I'm pretty sure, who testified that there was no social media about the white van, and like that was that. So it came up in questioning where Mr. Baldwin, during his cross-examination, he was asking questions about, well, so haven't you heard about, a report of a white van that was at the park and offering kids candy or things like that. But the jury's instructed the lawyer's questions aren't evidence, and what the lawyers say isn't evidence, and so they can't really hang their hat on that as like proof that any of those things actually happened or were out there. So it did end up being a little bit of a gap in the defense case, which I think is really unfortunate, because that's exactly the kind of detail that the state can hang its hat on to say, look, even though we have plenty of reason to be suspicious of these confessions because of the circumstances in which they were given, if we can validate it through the content, then that can be a reason for you to think that those confessions are valid. So
that's the thing. And he never even said the van was white. Like DB said,
that's true. No, he never said the van was white. That's true. They just said a van. They just said a van.
Exactly. Yeah. It just seems like such a generic piece of information. Mm-hmm. It's not something to hang your hat on, I wouldn't have thought. Mm-hmm. However, okay, what I wanted to do today, and I want to get you, Andrea, to weigh in on all of this, is I want to compare these two cases, because I'm very worried for Bryan Kohberger and his chances if he makes it to trial. And the reason I say if is because right now there are 13 motions to suppress that could potentially, and we don't know, but could potentially impact whether or not there's enough for the prosecution to actually take the case to trial. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that soon. However, if he goes to trial, I personally think he's screwed. Mm-hmm. The reason I think he's screwed is because I think that a jury will find him guilty because of the bad man effect, basically. So bad man walks into the courthouse, and everyone knows that he's been incarcerated. It's very hard to imagine that the people don't know that he's incarcerated. He is charged with the quadruple homicide of 4 people. So therefore, he's the bad man as far as the state's concerned. They don't really need that much, because it's a process of being convinced that he's innocent, really. Mm-hmm. He's on the back foot to start off with. So I wanted to compare these two cases because I think that they have more similarities than we'd hope for. They have very limited evidence, and you've actually said the same thing yourself, Andrea. I've heard you say that they both have limited evidence. Mm-hmm. It didn't seem that way when the state first came out in Idaho, but a lot of things have changed since that moment, don't you think?
Yeah, well, my view of the probable cause affidavit at the time was like, well, this isn't a lot. It's enough for an arrest. But I think kind of the whole expectation at that point in time was that if he's guilty, there's going to be so much that's available to them post-arrest that's then going to really be where the real meat of the case comes in, right? They're going to get his car, they're going to find blood, they're going to find his weird internet searches, all of that type of stuff. They're going to find his planning and his stalking, and it's going to be everywhere. And just from what we know from the pretrial process, it not only seems like that isn't the case, but it seems like some of these premises that are there in the probable cause affidavit are potentially not all that good. And the most significant one that we heard about from the pretrial hearing on the defense motion to compel deals with the cell site data and what looks like potentially some liberties that maybe the Moscow Police Department took with kind of interpreting that cell site data to try to make it fit a theory of guilt that may not ultimately be substantiated.
Yes, and that's where their friend, the defense's friend, Mr. Syray, is going to come in. Mm-hmm. And they used the term exonerated, which was huge. I remember when that word came in, I have a theory about Mr. Syray. I think that when Mr. Syray came in, he showed Ann Taylor and Elizabeth Massoff, the entire team, something that made them feel very confident in his innocence. Because it was around then that they came out in open court, Ann Taylor and both Elizabeth Massoff, both came out and said that our client is innocent. Which is a big thing to say.
It is. And I know there's a lot of people that don't, they think they're like, oh, defense lawyers say that kind of thing all the time. No, we do not. We absolutely do not. Like, your credibility is on the line with the court, not just in this particular case, but then in every future case that you're in front of this court on. You do not lightly assert that you think somebody is innocent in a case. And Mr. Syray himself, yes, you're saying he used extremely strong language. He came out on the stand and said, well, granted that I haven't seen everything because they're not turning over all of the data. Yep. So we don't have the entire picture, but given what I have seen, everything is exculpatory. That's a really strong statement to make. That means it shows Bryan Kohberger didn't do it. So if that's the case, that's, fingers crossed, going to be the real hope that he has for getting a fair shake in Idaho, because just the problem, and study after study tends to show that jurors will put a burden of proof on the defendant, even though the instructions will say the state has the full burden, the defense doesn't have to prove anything to you. It's part of this process of understanding what reasonable doubt means, that they expect the defense to present them with doubts. And so that's what he's got to kind of hold on to, is being able, hopefully, to find something like that is, utterly inconsistent with him being guilty of the crime. The problem is we had that with Richard Allen too. The phone data is utterly inconsistent with the state's theory of how this crime took place. It can't be 100%. Reconciled with the 20 feet elevation change, and not enough steps to get to the crime scene, et cetera, et cetera. But it wasn't enough.
If Syray can testify and show that he was 40 miles to the west between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., that's it.
It should be. It should be it. It should be.
It should be it.
But you will be shocked. I mean, I will already tell you, there will be people saying, well, that doesn't mean just because his phone was somewhere doesn't mean he had his phone with him. But people have this amazing ability to imagine all kinds of scenarios to justify their pre-decided, conclusion about the case. We hear the same thing. Oh, well, the reason why there's no DNA in his car is because he, saran wrapped the entire thing.
Yeah. There's no sign of cleaning, but that's okay, because it was a few weeks later, so the signs of cleaning are gone, right?
Yeah. So and people will just inject facts to try to justify it, even when there's no proof of that. So I can already tell you, if they prove his phone is 40 miles elsewhere, people who are already determined of his guilt, they will do two things. One, they will get very angry, and they'll get very insulting at people, because that's what you do when you have cognitive dissonance, when reality doesn't line up with your expectation of what it should be. That's upsetting to people. They will get angry. And the next thing that they will do is they will imagine and make up scenarios that allow them to hang on to that pre-existing determination. And so they'll come up with a story where, oh, he gave his phone to somebody who drove it away, as a way of setting up an alibi. There'll be no proof of it at all. But since they already have it in their minds that he is, simultaneously the smartest killer that's ever existed, and also the dumbest,
the stupidest, yep, and the cleanest,
and the dirtiest. Like they'll come up with scenarios to be able to justify that, even though there's no evidence for any of those.
Yeah, 100%. I love how they're always the cleanest, right? Like somehow they manage to evade getting any of their skin cells or anything on any surface whatsoever. It's amazing.
Except for the one, most incriminating thing, right? This knife sheath under the victim on the bed.
And it's like, but he was toying with it.
Yeah.
And just
he did it on purpose.
Oh yeah.
It's all a
It
game.
was fantasizing about how great it would be. And then he just went, oops, and dropped it in this moment of passion. It's just like, are you for real? Is this a novel or what?
So, it's not a good novel. It's not a good novel. I guarantee, write this novel, it won't sell.
I can totally imagine Bill Thompson's opening statement, and that's how it's going to be. It's going to be like that. He went in and he stabby, and he was in such a frenzy that he dropped the sheath like that. It's going to be this moment of pause, dropped the sheath, and it's just like, what? Really? Okay. But they'll buy it. They'll buy it. Right, so guys, what we're doing is playing a little game. So over here on the left of the screen, we have Richard Allen's, these are the points that the state really went with, because they didn't have to go with anything much else. We have, and someone did point out before, what's with the white cars? We have a white van. In fact, I'm going to bring up the little points here. So we have this at the top, the tip line, right? So we have this tip line up here. We have the info only the killer could know. So self-report, he was at the trails. Info only the killer could know. We have the bridge guy video. We have the magic bullet. And we have the confessions. So I think I might confess now, because why not? Right? Just because. Right? All right. So those are all the things that convinced the jurors. Right? Have I missed something? Was there something else that was compelling and made the jurors think, oh yeah, it was definitely him?
I mean, I don't think so. The big ones, I think, are just the confession, the coming forward. That's kind of what you hear, consistently with the feedback from people. Think he was guilty. Well, he put himself at the scene. He was wearing the same clothes as Bridge Guy. That's another one that ended up not really being the case once you heard the actual interrogation and what he really said in that interview. It's not what he said at all.
Okay. So, we're coming to that. We're coming to the reasons to doubt all that stuff, because that's a big list. So if we go there's the list of. Oops, I'll just get rid of this stuff. Yeah, there's a list of reasons to doubt all that stuff, and it seems quite and I'm sure there's more. They're just the ones I could think of. So the stuff on the left is the reasons to believe that Richard Allen is the killer, if you're going to believe it. And the stuff on the right is reasons, or the room for reasonable doubt. So we had that the defendant had no prior criminal history or connection to the victims. That's not a biggie, right? Now, other bullets were not excluded. That's a biggie, right? So the whole thing with the magic bullet and it being tested. Like, you give me your thoughts on that one.
I mean, this was very problematic, just on so many levels. As far as a basic admissibility level, I don't think that this should have come in. The fact that she used this methodology of comparing a spent shell casing to an unspent one and argued that basically it's the same. It doesn't matter. There's no validation or study or anything, an error rate associated with this type of methodology that would allow her to make that type of claim with any kind of scientific validity. So the fact that she's allowed to do it at all is very questionable to me. But then, yeah, there's a whole logical problem here with saying and testifying, well, it's Richard Allen's gun that produced this bullet, but at the same time, I can't exclude these other firearms. And even when they came back to it, and she had revised her opinion, so she said that initially 3 different firearms, she could not exclude them as being the source of that bullet. She then kind of like gave a little caveat to her testimony, which is that, well, part of the reason why is because of the timing in which I did these examinations. Now, to me, this like underscores how that means this is not a scientific process, right? Because the timing in which you conduct your experiments should not affect the results of the experiments.
No.
If they're legitimate objective experiments. But nevertheless, the timing is what factored into some of that. And so if she were looking at all of the firearms at the same time, she would now be able to exclude one of those other 3 that she couldn't exclude before. But that means you're telling me you can't exclude these other 2 guns, even when you saying that Richard Allen's gun produced this bullet. That would require logically a conclusion that these other guns could not have done it. And so it's just this very internally inconsistent and logically problematic bit of evidence that was presented to the jury. It's hard to know how much weight they put on it in light of the just, total circumstances of the case. But that one was just, from my perspective, that was exceptionally weak in terms of a link.
I feel like, I mean, I wish we could talk to the jurors. I wish we can get into their minds, but I think that that's probably a large piece of the puzzle, because jurors love forensic evidence. They love something that ties the person physically to the crime scene. And people in chat who don't know about the Zachariah Anderson case, the one thing that really tied that one up was a pinhead of touch DNA. I am sure that if the state manages to get in the transfer of touch DNA in the Kohberger case, that will be the thing that hangs him.
100%.
Yep.
100%.
And this, I believe that bullet is the touch DNA of this case.
Well, one of the concerns too I had about the bullet and just how that all came out at trial was it revolved around the jury questions. And as soon as I kind of saw the questions that these jurors were asking on this, my heart kind of dropped into my stomach a little bit, because it seemed pretty clearly to suggest that they thought the defense had some obligation to do something with that bullet, to do some testing, to, just basically present something more than they presented, which is showing that, hey, this underlying, theory and the documentation of the testing and so forth, it can't be substantiated by what they've produced. The jury seemed to be putting a burden on him to say, no, you needed to go test the bullet and prove that it could not have come from his gun. And that's, of course, the exact inverse of what the beyond a reasonable doubt standard and the presumption of innocence are supposed to require.
Absolutely. And also, they fired the gun. They fired the bullet, which was another thing that I was talking to, Sean was on here last week, and we were watching a video about the testing process that was done by this expert, and it was fired in order to create the marks. Richard Allen's bullet the bullet was not fired. So, how can you
Yeah.
compare that? They called apples to more detailed apples. It's like, what?
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. Okay, so that's why I've got the little magic guy there, because the magic guy is when things aren't really real. Okay, so the self-report was not the action of a guilty person. We're talking about this self-report up here, right? And the self-report being him calling the tip line. I don't feel like calling the tip line is the action of a guilty person. Whereas I think that it was painted by the state as he put himself there. So I think that's actually a cause for reasonable doubt. Bridge Guy video is unidentifiable as Allen or any specific person. It's only really good for eliminating suspects. The confessions were made after 6 months of physical and mental torture. Well, that's a biggie. That's a biggie, but who knows what the jury was thinking there. The information he gave was very generic. So we're talking now about the info that only the killer could know. So the thing with the van, and there was the sticks and the box cutter, was it? So he gave very generic information, and very few specifics were very likely known to his psychologist and guard. So he could have been told. But from what you say, that not necessarily the jurors would have picked up on that.
Yeah, I don't think that just from what they had at trial, the van, I think the van was a big problem for the defense case.
That sucks. Sorry. The Allen's version of events given in psychosis. Now this is the biggest one for me. Allen's version of events given in psychosis do not align with the state's timeline, nor are they plausible given the state of the bodies as pictured at the crime scene. That for me is the biggest one, because if they really looked at those bodies at the crime scene, if they really went through the timeline as the state put it to them, it doesn't align with the confessions that he gave at all.
Yeah.
So that's cause for reasonable doubt, surely.
Yeah.
Surely. So what part of the assignment did they not understand? I'm floored by it. So, yeah, I mean, you were there to hear their instructions. Do you think that they just didn't get it, or it was they just had decided already at that point, or?
It's hard to say. I mean, so my impression of the instructions that they got were that these were, in many ways, extremely favorable instructions. They got instructions on reasonable doubt both before they heard the evidence and after they heard the evidence. So it was something that got reiterated to them at kind of, bookends to the trial process. That is not the case in Idaho. They're not necessarily going to get another reasonable doubt instruction at the conclusion of the trial. It's included in the form instructions for the preliminary ones that they get at the beginning, but not otherwise. The Idaho instruction on reasonable doubt is very sparse compared to the kind of language that was included here in Indiana. Just included things like, you need to be certain, you need to be firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt, and if he's probably guilty, that's not enough. So a lot of this very favorable language that it's difficult to kind of improve on that. I think the challenge is just always a little bit of human nature. It's we have this idea, this logical idea that the way that the human brain works is that we get information and then we form an opinion. And then if we get new information, we will update our opinion based on that new information. And just the reality of human decision-making seems to indicate that very little decision-making actually happens in the rational brain like that. The frontal lobes are not driving our decisions. They are justifying the decisions that we've already made back in the more emotional parts of our brain. And so when people come in and they get an impression about something, or they get that suspicion, or they think, very naturally, oh, this guy is charged with a crime, Once again, study after study tends to show that approximately 50% of people that walk into a courtroom and see the guy, they'll think he's guilty just by virtue of the fact that he's the one that the state has chosen to bring this charge against. And so they give that weight, even though legally they're not supposed to do that. But that's just the natural human decision making process. Then what happens is you get new information that challenges that. Again, the theory is, oh, that'll get you to update your opinion, but the reality is that it rarely works that way. If anything, contradictory information can even entrench people more firmly in the belief that they already held, and it can encourage them to like go through these processes like we've been describing, where you just look for reason after reason after reason. You put that frontal lobe to work to try to justify why you should continue to feel the way that you already feel.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah, a lot of confirmation bias involved. It just seems to be kind of an unfortunate reality of how we are as humans, and so it's hard to say how do we counter that. We can try to be aware of it. We can try to point that out. We can try to be selective for those types of qualities in our jurors. I've said before that when I'm selecting a jury, I don't care about things like demographics and what was your job and, these types of sort of cookie cutter formulas that people will often use to try to like get into their head and think what are their prejudices and things like that. I care about two things. I care about, does this person listen to me? Like, can we connect on a level where we can communicate and you hear me? And the other thing I care about is, are you open? Are you a person who is open, or are you a person who is closed, fixed in your ideas, fixed in your opinions and stuff like that? As the defense attorney, I want people who are open, because open people are going to tend to be more skeptical about the information that they receive, and be more reluctant to reach that firm conclusion on the basis of what may be very limited evidence in the case. So I mean, those are the best the best suggestions I have for how to improve the process, but it seems to be honestly a little bit inherent in just human nature.
It does. And I want to ask you a question, and then I want to just bring up a couple of chats that are really interesting. Firstly, okay, my question for you is, how do you explain reasonable doubt to a jury if you are allowed that opportunity? I know some courts don't allow that to be the case, but what's your favorite way to try and get the concept across to a jury?
So the way that I have used it most often is actually a really terrible way, because what I ultimately end up doing is burden shifting. But what I do is I tell the jurors that another way to think of a reasonable doubt is that if there is a plausible alternative explanation for the evidence, then that's what a doubt is. And so it means you can't be confident that the state's version is the correct one if there's a plausible alternative. I call that burden shifting because it puts the burden on me to then propose to them what the plausible alternatives are. Then, typically ends up kind of being my job in the closing argument, is showing you, here's how you can interpret the evidence in a way that's consistent with the defendant's innocence. That was another issue with the jury instructions that they had here in Indiana. There's all this favorable language about how if there's multiple interpretations, you have to adopt the one that is consistent with the defendant's innocence. I've seen some criticism of this type of language that suggests that it puts the defendant's explanations on an equal footing with the state's explanations. And what that ultimately does is that serves to lower their expectation of how much proof the state needs to have. It makes it much more of a preponderance of the evidence standard. Which one of these do we believe versus which one of these do we not? And so I have seen some, there's a California Law Review article that looks extensively at reasonable doubt instructions across all kinds of different jurisdictions and has proposals and things like that. But one of the things that they suggest is that you should really just get away from that altogether, and you should focus on the comparative standard. So point out to them, you know, in some civil cases, you use preponderance of the evidence. That's what you use
Yep.
for most of your everyday decisions. Is this more likely? Is it less likely? The
Yep.
criminal case needs to be higher than that. In other civil cases, they'll use a clear and convincing standard. That means that you think it's highly probable that the
Yep.
proposition is true. The criminal case needs to be even higher than that. It needs to be
It's up there.
uh, very close to certain. Um, and so there's always pushback from prosecutors, of course, because they don't want that type of language being
No.
used. They always highlight, well, you can't have absolute certainty in anything. Of course, you can't have absolute certainty, but you need to have pretty close, pretty close to absolute
It's very
certainty
close.
to convict somebody of a crime.
It's the highest level of certainty, or it's the highest level of proof in the land, is
Mhm.
what I've heard to be the explanation for it. So there's every level of like the preponderance is 51%, and then there's about 75% for what was the second one that you said?
The clear and convincing.
Yeah, and then we're talking the very highest amount of weight that the jurors need to put onto their decision. You're potentially making a decision that changes someone else's life and all of the lives of the people around them. I was saying in the last stream that I had on this, the only person that I've listened to that I really liked their answer to this was Jim Griffin, who was Alec Murdoch's lawyer. He explained it like it was, if you're buying your family home and you're going through all of the checks and balances of buying your family home, and you're getting the pest inspection done and the building checks done and all that kind of thing, and you're about to make that final decision and sign on the line, and you get that feeling that something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to go ahead with that, or are you going to go check that out? Because that's really something that's going to affect you and your family for the rest of your lives. So it's that big of a deal. Are you going to make that big decision and not check that thing out? Because that's reasonable doubt.
Mm-hmm.
There's that thing. You think you're sure, but are you really sure? Like, you go and
Mm-hmm.
check it out, because so many of the metaphors that people use are really trivial things. Like I went and searched and I found things like, are you sure that there's chips in this bag? Stuff like that. And it's like, maybe you're eliminating all reasonable doubt by being sure that the chip factory actually makes chips.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really trivial analogy, because
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because those analogies get criticized a lot of the time for that exact reason. The idea that it either trivializes the burden of proof, that the decision making, by comparing it to things that aren't really equivalent, or it ends up having the reverse effect of suggesting that, like, you need to have a lot of reasons to have reasonable doubt. If the
yeah,
if the rat inspection wasn't enough, then maybe the roof shingles. If that's still not enough, then maybe this other. And so it gets people
exactly.
thinking in comparison to scenarios that are not really equivalent. And so I think if you are going to use examples like that, it's very important to make sure that the stakes are extremely high. So you need to be
Yes.
talking about things like, you're going to leave your newborn infant with a babysitter. Now let's talk about,
Yeah.
the type of background check that you would expect to have on this babysitter. And, an alert comes up. Just put it in the framework that people can understand. This is a much, much higher stakes type of question than just,
Exactly.
am I going to eat these chips or that one?
Exactly. Because, I mean, I went searching for any kind of example that I could find on the internet to to do with explaining reasonable doubt, and I found all these lawyers with these sort of 4 to 10 minute clips, and they were providing these very trivial metaphors, and I was like, well, surely there's something better than this. Now, I have a couple of questions. Beautiful Waterfall says, Andrea, are you personally convinced he's actually innocent. I think you're talking about Richard Allen now, or just that he should have been found not guilty based on evidence.
From what I saw at trial, I think he's actually innocent. I don't think that the evidence that they came up with is consistent with their theory. It doesn't fit their timeline. To me, the most plausible explanation that kind of reconciles all of the different pieces is that he was in fact on the trail when he said he was during the interrogation that was recorded, when he said between like 12 and 1. And that explains why he doesn't match the description that any of the eyewitnesses saw. It explains why his car wasn't there.
Yep.
It explains why he would be, like you said, perfectly willing to come forward and volunteer what he knew and what he saw to police. I'm not at all convinced that he's the guy that did it.
No, it's guilty people just don't do that. Like, it doesn't make sense for someone who just murdered 2 girls a couple of days ago to come forth and go, oh yeah, so I was down there and here's what I saw, and just let me know if there's anything else you need. Okay, bye. And just go back to his house and live in the same place for 5 years and go about his life. Everything's fine. It just
no history of anything like this. Like, I'm sorry, but look at this crime. Like, look at this crime. Look what it would take to commit this crime. This is a psychopathic person. That sort of thing is not just like voluntarily, appear in middle age out of nowhere and then disappear. This is something that is going to, there's going to be behavioral issues probably all the way back into childhood with somebody who has the capacity to do something like this. So
absolutely.
I didn't think it was consistent at all with what we saw. I will say that when and if these interrogation videos ever get public, I'm going to be very interested to see what the reaction is to them, because there was not a single person I talked to in that courtroom, including people that do believe that he's guilty, that he committed the crime, that thought he seemed guilty in those videos. He seems extremely sincere and exactly like anybody who is being wrongfully accused of something that they didn't do would behave.
Yes, truth and transparency. Hello, Lana. Good to have you here. How are we not talking about DNA, the most prominent piece of evidence in today's world, and yet no DNA at crime scene is from Richard Allen, yet so many other mixtures and unidentified? Sorry if you went over an extra one there. Unidentified. No, I don't have an extra one there. Oh, and that the other ones were unidentified, you mean? Is that right, Lana? I think that's probably right. Andrea.
Yeah, I mean, this one for me is a little bit tricky because, of course, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right? The fact that somebody doesn't leave DNA at a crime scene doesn't mean that they're not there at the crime scene. There can be a whole variety of explanations for why somebody could be present and not leave DNA. So the absence of DNA, I don't see as particularly that strong. That said, the presence of this other DNA that the state didn't seem to be all that interested in, trying to pursue the provenance of it. The whole issue with the hairs, particularly the 3 hairs that were inconsistent with either of the victims that were found at the crime scene that they had the opportunity to test, and they were just like, nah. No, we're not going to do that. These to me are very problematic because they tend to show an investigation that is not really interested in looking at getting all of the information. It's an investigation that was interested in being able to get enough to make a case and then stop and not ask questions that might poke holes in some of their premises. So this is exactly the same kind of bias that we're talking about, that people who already have a predetermined conclusion are going to engage in. You'll just stop asking hard questions.
Yeah, let's just stop asking that stuff, shall we? Let's just move on. Let's make it much easier for everybody. All right, let's keep going, shall we?
And then get mad at you for asking.
Yeah.
You conspiracy theorists? I mean, it's wild.
Do you want a tinfoil hat? Please. Dear me. Alrighty. Moving on. So, oops, I need to get rid of this thing. Bin. Okay, so Kohberger. Now on the right, he unfortunately has a bunch of things that they kind of align in a way with the things that were put forth by the state in Indiana. So, and what I mean they align, what I say they align, they're similar in terms of their lack of material, the lack of weight, I guess. They're all kind of neither here nor there. That we have this little bit of DNA. Hang on, we have this little bit of touch DNA on the knife sheath. Now, a knife sheath, as far as I'm aware, is not actually a weapon. It's an object that could house a weapon, but it's not the weapon. And we've never even seen it. We've never seen this sheath. Now, supposedly his touch DNA is on the clasp. So we have that. That will be the smoking gun. As far as I'm concerned, there is no way that he is likely to be acquitted if that piece of evidence comes in. I think that everything else will be confirmation bias once the jury is privy to that one. Then we have the witness description. Look, I put some little eyebrows on him because
you kind of have to make it fit. Like he's not really that bushy with his eyebrows.
Exactly. He doesn't really have bushy eyebrows. But one of the victims said that they witnessed this man walking in the house, and he said, "Don't worry, I'm going to help you." And he was tall and thin and bushy eyebrows, mask, so you couldn't see anything else. But yeah, the bushy eyebrows, that was the big deal. For the life of me, I can't see the bushy eyebrows, so I put some on him. We have, okay, so that's the witness description. So we have this white Elantra. Now, the white Elantra, goodness me with the white Elantra. How many white Elantras are in that area? How many could it actually be? A lot.
Well, and the thing that really disturbs me too about the white Elantra was the shifting of the model year. You know, that was just a problem. You know, like as soon as you focus on a guy who's got a different model year Elantra, suddenly you change your analysis of what you're seeing on this video so that it happens to fit the car that this person you're targeting is driving. It's so problematic from the idea that the evidence should drive the investigation and not vice versa, but that's what we have.
That's it. Hello, Nick, Viking Raid. Good to see you guys. Where's Nick? Nick's in here somewhere. Hello, Nick. I can't find you. Oh, there he is. Me Raid. Oops. Hide. Me Raid. Hello, Nick Starro. How are you? Good to see you. Yeah, absolutely. So originally, they were talking about 2011 to 2013, if I'm not incorrect. And he drove a later model. Not that it matters. These things don't matter, do they? We can make that stuff work. We can work with that. Now, the other thing is with the CCTV of there being a white Elantra supposedly driving up and down the street, like you can't see it. You can't see any tags or anything on it, so you can't be sure that it's actually his. But the narrative is that they put out there that it was his. It was definitely his. We found it. We found the guy. He drives that car. It's his car. People believe it. So we have that. We have his white Elantra. And we have the phone data. And the phone data is a big one in question as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Do we have anything really else? Am I missing anything big?
I mean, part of the problem is that at this point we don't know. This is
Yeah.
what we knew that we had going from the point of the probable cause affidavit, and what we can infer from what we've learned after the fact. What we don't have any evidence of connections of any kind with any of the victims, and we don't have either victim DNA or any explanation for its absence, which would tend to mean things like evidence of cleaning. Chemical residues, things like that, that would suggest some type of, effort to hide evidence in his car, in his apartment, or something like that. So we know they don't have those things. As far as what else they may have, it's just a big question mark at this point in time.
Okay, question for you though, and everybody else who's been watching this. If the state had some bombshell evidence, do you think they wouldn't be hinting at it at least? Like, come on. They'd be saying,
Yeah.
they
I mean,
wouldn't be looking like idiots right now, because at the moment they're not looking too good.
Yeah, no, I feel like this is a really good point, because it's just it's a two can play that game kind of situation. If the defense is going to use their pleadings to point out the weakness of the state case, the kind of normal reaction to that is to respond to that, especially when the purpose here is really, for these defense pleadings, it's to get the court to kind of take their position seriously and recognize, we're coming from this from a standpoint of, we actually have a good defense here, and so you need to take it seriously. You would expect the state to want to kind of undermine that, to be able to put their thumb on the scale, so that the judge is more inclined to look at things through a prosecution friendly lens. So the fact that they haven't done any of that, I mean, no, it's not dispositive, but is it a hint? It kind of seems like it.
This has been going on a while now, and the state just keeps having to backtrack. Basically, like everything in the PCA that they've had to quietly kind of go backwards on. Like, for example, there was something in one of the recent documents where they buried in the footnotes that the vicinity of the cell tower pings don't necessarily put the phone near the house, but in the vicinity, right? So they changed the wording to sound like it, to clarify that it doesn't put the car like right next to the house, phone, right next to the house, but in the vicinity, right? So that's a big change in the language, because it's true, like the pings put him kind of in the same neighborhood, right? So
how big are we defining a neighborhood is part of the problem here. I mean, the cell site data, the precision of the cell site data is very much an issue in rural communities like this. It's not at all like being somewhere like downtown Philadelphia, where they'll have 20 different towers covering the same square foot of city ground. You have very limited tower coverage, and so the range of that tower is really that's as precise as you can get. And tower ranges can be 10, 20, even 30 miles. One of the things that was very telling, from even just back to the probable cause affidavit, was their acknowledgement that they said he pinged off of the King Road tower the following day, but they have reason to believe that he wasn't actually there. So they already know that the ping doesn't necessarily correspond with his presence in the area, but they're putting all of this weight on it as substantial evidence of guilt.
Well, because like the maps that they made, they aren't just the pings; they're the pings and the CCTV, right? So they rely on the CCTV being his car, but you don't know whether they're his car or not. So when you take the CCTV of his car away, and you rely only on the pings, they suddenly become far less accurate. You can't really make a map anymore, because you don't know where he was. Like, the two things are required.
And there's a big problem with that too, which is that the route that they have laid out for him based on these pings for how he got to the murder scene is not backed up by the CCTV. That was the issue that came out at the hearing about the cannabis shop. His car should be on the road outside the cannabis shop. The cannabis shop has cameras that would cover this area. If they took the route that, according to the police, he took because of how his phone pinged, he would have been there. So the fact that he's not, that in and of itself should be a big problem for the state's case.
Yeah, and they haven't really tried to correct this. They're kind of like, they're just sort of sitting on their hands at the moment and allowing pieces from the PCA to be refuted and debunked, and not coming forth with further information that they've got, hey, don't worry guys, we've got him, we've got this and we've got that. So it's not looking too good for the old state right now. So anyway, I just want to move on and show, okay, so this is all they've got right now as it stands. I'm going to, hang on just a minute, close this off and move on. Okay, so room for reasonable doubt. Defendant had no prior criminal history or connection to the victims. Oh, well, doesn't that sound kind of similar to somebody? Now, I put the little guy on this one because I feel like this is in some way aligns with the, should I say junk science? Should I? Yeah, the DNA match on the knife sheath is transfer DNA. So it could have come from elsewhere and it's not reliable. Kind of like the bullet thing was not reliable.
Yeah, it kind of.
I don't think much of transfer DNA, by the way.
The irony of trace DNA is it's almost like the exact opposite of junk science. It's science that's gotten so good that the utility is now minimal because they're so good at detecting tiny, minuscule amounts of DNA that are everywhere in the environment, that it no longer really gives you any real meaning about how did that DNA get there. And so unless you have some other type of association, like a body fluid or something like that can help you explain, like tell the story of how the DNA came to be deposited there, trace DNA in and of itself really doesn't always give you very much information.
Andrea, I am of the opinion that trace/touch DNA should not be admissible in isolation. It just shouldn't. It is just so unreliable and misleading on its own. Now, I have done a little bit of research on this, and what came up for me was that it was actually first discovered and used in Australian courts, and it was called touch DNA because it came from fingerprints, and it was used to back up partial fingerprints. So that's why it was called touch DNA, because you'd have a fingerprint that was like a partial fingerprint, and then they would get the skin cells that would go along with it, and they would identify that DNA, and they would go, okay, so we have this partial fingerprint, plus we have the skin cells, and we'll bring that into court with it. So you have the two things that go together to prove that that was that person. So
see, even in that situation, I'm so deeply concerned about that because, okay, there have been some studies now about the transferability of trace DNA. Most of this is being done, by the way, in Australia. It's not being done in the United States. They don't have an interest in looking at kind of the underlying premises of this these forensic techniques. But the reason why that concerns me is because one of the studies that was done on the transferability of DNA, it was looking at the ability of, for example, me, if I shake your hand and I pick up some of your DNA from your hand, what's the likelihood then that I will transfer that onto a different object? And what they found was that approximately 30% of the time in this experiment, I would transfer your DNA and only your DNA, not my own. And so that would be a situation where, yeah, my fingerprint would be on this object and there would be DNA that's there, but it's not mine, it's
It's not
yours.
yours. It's not yours.
And so the
I'm
prevalence
with
of
you.
this type of thing is very problematic.
I think it should be inadmissible unless there's something very solid to go along with it. Like, it is so problematic. It's just so problematic. I've seen too many instances of touch/transfer DNA being admitted into court and juries just considering it's DNA. Done.
Yeah. And that's
Done.
why, like, exactly like you're saying, this is going to be such a hurdle for Bryan Kohberger to overcome, because number one, like the assumption is already going to be his DNA is there, therefore he's guilty, right? He committed the crime. DNA is super strong evidence, therefore he's guilty. But then it's also going to come into that burden shifting issue where, okay, well then what's the alternative explanation? Defense, you need to show us like the pathway of how his DNA got onto this knife sheath. If you're saying it isn't because, you know, he handled the knife sheath during the murders, that's absolutely not his burden. The burden it should be on the state to prove that the only way his DNA could get there is because he handled the knife sheath during the course of the murders. If a jury is rigorously applying the presumption of innocence and the beyond a reasonable doubt standards, that's what it's going to be. But as a practical matter, they're going to be like, Bryan, how did your DNA get there? You have the obligation now to explain, well, was it because you graded the paper of somebody who interns with the MPD and was at the crime scene? Is it because you use the gas pump to fill up your car like right before the murderer did? There are so many possible pathways that it could get there. And, very unlikely that the defense is going to be able to examine all of those or.
Yeah, exactly. It's not possible.
Come up with any kind of response to that. So it's just, it's a big problem for him, that trace DNA.
It's huge. And we'll talk in a moment about the motions to suppress. So who knows where that's going to go. Okay, so next, the DNA was obtained as a result of an unlawful IgG search that kickstarted the investigation into BK. The current motions to suppress hinge on this argument. So, we'll get into that shortly. So the white Elantra seen on CCTV can't be positively identified as the defendant's vehicle. That would be a big room for reasonable doubt, you would think, unless there's some way that they can provide proof that it's his. Defense expert Cy Ray will testify the phone, which the state has used to pinpoint the car's location at other times of the evening, so therefore the car too. The phone's tied to the car. So you can't say, oh, well, just because the phone was somewhere else doesn't mean he wasn't there. Well, he was in the car as per the state's timeline. The car and the phone were together as per the route that they have made. So you can't say that the phone being elsewhere is some sort of way out of that. And he's going to say that the phone was 40 miles to the west between 2 and 4 a.m. So kind of like you were saying earlier, Andrea, people will come up with a way of getting that phone and putting it 40 miles to the west, but it just doesn't align with the rest of the timeline the state's putting forth, unless they come up with a different timeline, which they could.
Yeah, they could.
Yeah. And Bryan's eyebrows really aren't very bushy. That's not.
Thank you. They're really not.
They're not.
They're just sort of normal guy eyebrows. I don't know where the bushy comes from.
Well, you know what? His most recent mugshot, people were saying that he had his eyebrows, cut. for that.
Brother.
Yeah. Oh, right. I'm not kidding. They did. People, like, legit, they were saying that. Okay. So, hello, David. Thank you for the 9.99 super chat. Talk about the timeline. Supposedly
Mhm.
14 minutes to drive down the road, enter the house. God, the food delivery guy, unalive 4 people. David uses voice to text.
Mhm.
Um, unalive 4 people, get in the car and back down the road.
Mhm.
What do you have to say to that?
I mean, yeah, it does seem to be a little bit of a problem from at least a theoretical standpoint of just try to walk me through this. They have they have his their timeline is based on his car, or what they're claiming is his car, being seen outside. That kind of starts the window being running, and then when the car is seen leaving the area at a high rate of speed, that's essentially their timeline. But they got the DoorDash guy showing up, in the middle of all this as well. So that's going to cut things back because the DoorDash guy didn't see them. Like, there's just this difficulty in kind of being able to account for, like we saw with Richard Allen, the ability to commit all of these acts in a short period of time undetected. By the way, the dog never barked about anything. Like, just no noise, no noise through any of this. Like, so little noise that not even the roommates who were home knew that anything was happening. This is particularly problematic, I think, with that DoorDash delivery. The fact that we know not everybody was asleep in that house. This isn't a situation where, oh, he just caught them all asleep in their beds. No, she had just gotten up, or somebody in the house had gotten in and gotten that DoorDash. So yeah, and then when you account for somehow we have to have him in a bio suit, in the middle of all this as well.
This is
But
the
he's
thing.
also, he's also got to remove the bio seat, right?
He's
Because Dylan Mortensen didn't see
Superman.
him in a bio suit. We got to
This
incorporate
dude,
all these things.
he's a shapeshifter.
Hmm.
Like, this is some sort of psyop. I don't know. But Brandon, I wanted to bring yours up because I'm not
Hmm.
sure how much you've been following the case, but this goes to show the kind of narrative that's been put
Hmm.
out there.
Yep.
Don't they have him casing the neighborhood? That's what they want you to think,
Hmm.
right? No, he was not casing the neighborhood at all.
Hmm.
But this is the what was in the PCA, what was out there and was being spread by the prosecutors and by the police force in the early days was, yes, he was out there casing the neighborhood. He was stalking them. Like, he has some connection to the people in the house. He didn't know them at all. There was nothing at all. There's nothing at all to show to prove that he had any connection, that he knew these people, that he actually was casing the house or anything like that. So, and it's interesting because there's so much belief out there that that's the case.
Yeah, and this in particular, this is deriving once again from that ping data. And so what the evidence shows is that on multiple occasions, his phone has connected with the cell phone tower in Moscow. That, as the PC affidavit itself shows, doesn't mean that he's in Moscow. They have
No.
said straight out in their affidavit, it connected on at least one occasion when they know he wasn't there. So again, this just kind of goes to the range, the fact that these are adjoining towns. It's not really that unusual to go to Moscow when you're in Pullman. They're literally right there. Um, that particular piece of information, because that's how the state is using it in the probable cause affidavit, they're trying to say this is proof that he cased the house, or that
Yeah.
he's stalked these victims or whatever. That's why this narrative is out there. But when you look at the basis for why they're making that claim, it's really not particularly strong, and their own PCA undermines it.
Absolutely. And it goes to show you just any of us could be framed for something like this. We could end up being the person who ends up being a defendant in any case because our phone tattles on us. It's a tattletale. So our phone can show us to be driving around someone's house, right? And it just could be that that happens to be a neighborhood that we go to sometimes. Maybe there's a restaurant there that we like. Maybe there's some sort of park or something like that that we tend to visit. But we drive to that area for some reason that most people would find to be kind of strange, right? Mm-hmm. So this guy, he likes to go to Hawaii Park. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he stargazes and he hikes and stuff like that. He also has a bit of insomnia, it seems, right? So these things sound stupid in context of defending him against a quadruple homicide. But what if they're true? Mm-hmm. Right? What if they're true? Right? So there's nothing illegal about driving around during the night and wanting to go to a really pretty place and breathe in the fresh air. There's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. I have a theory that this guy, being someone who has studied cloud-based forensics, knew that his phone would exonerate him. And he mm-hmm. thought that he could hand that over and there would be something on there that would show that he wasn't there. Mm-hmm. Little did he know that all that information would be kept from his lawyers. Mm-hmm. That's just my take on it. But
yeah, well, and the other thing too is to remember is that when they were making all of these claims about the cell site data, this is not info from his phone. This is tower based. This is working from the other end. It's working from those conclusions. And so there's a massive amount of data that's potentially available through a phone that is far more than what you get from a cell tower. You can be out of signal range of cell service and still be connecting with the satellites that provide GPS data and things like that. So that's one of the big open questions in this case is once they got a hold of his phone, did that undermine these original conclusions that they were drawing from the ping data?
And I just wanted to bring up one question before we move on. Heidi says, why was he wearing gloves in his parents' kitchen?
This is one of the stories that's out there in the media that we already know that a massive amount of what the media has reported is untrue because they have told us that in court very specifically. So wait, you're just going to have to wait until trial on this one or wait for it to come out in a hearing or something like that. What the media has been reporting as facts in this case are not credible. They're not reliable. They have a very bad track record already. The whole Ann Taylor representing Kara Kernodle is just like one of the examples. It's one that's a particular hot button issue to me because it was such a transparent effort to smear an attorney who is doing an outstanding job of defending her client. It was patently untrue. It was easily verified as being untrue. And yet a number of people grabbed that and ran with it. So I just encourage you to be skeptical about the media reports because there's a reason why media reports aren't evidence in court.
So there was a Nancy Grace episode all about the gloves. In fact, I did a bit of a reaction to that because it was kind of funny. But why not? She even went and got a pair of dish gloves and picked up a cup of coffee and went, oh, hang on, I need to pick up my coffee with these gloves. It was quite silly. But yeah, she was of the point of view that if a man gets around wearing gloves all the time, he must be guilty. Guilty. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, so
that's the whole bad man phenomenon you've been talking about. He's a bad man. So the things that he does are necessarily weird and bad.
Exactly. I think her words were, if I were prosecuting this case, the first thing I would do is show them all the CCTV of him walking into shops with gloves on, and he'd be done. It's like, what? Okay. Sure. Righto. But then again, if he was wearing gloves, how did the touch DNA end up on the buckle there? That doesn't make any sense either. Haha, foiled, Grace. Foiled. Okay, so anyway, here's all the room for reasonable doubt, and that's just my notes. I'm sure Sleuthy's in chat. Sleuthy could probably come up with 5 times that amount. You're very good at coming up with tons of notes there, Sleuthy. How's it going, Sleuthy? All right, let's move on. Now, we need to change into a different format. Let's go here. So is it possible Idaho versus Kohberger will not make it to trial? And there is another super chat here that is about Richard Allen. We'll bring it up later, guys. Sorry to crypto tax lawyer. I'll bring you up at the end. Okay, so is it possible Idaho versus Kohberger will not make it to trial? The reason I ask is because of all of this. All of this. There is so much here that it makes me wonder. We have a motion for Frank's hearing, motion to suppress genetic info, motion to suppress Amazon, apartment, Apple, arrest warrant, ATT first warrant, cell phone data, Google, pen trap trace device, person in ID, Idaho, person in Pennsylvania. So that's his person. White Hyundai and Lambston statements. So he made some statements when he was arrested. Now, I've had a read of these, and I just wanted to bring this up. And that's this point here. They all seem to contain, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andrea, but they all seem to contain this statement. All information in the affidavit was gathered because of law enforcement's unconstitutional use of investigative genetic genealogy, and thus nothing in the warrant should remain. Mr. Kohberger has argued in a separate motion that the genetic genealogy investigation in this matter was done in violation of the Constitution. Additionally, he argues there would be no investigation into him without that original constitutional violation. It's not that the results of the IGG sped up the investigation. Instead, they focused the investigation on Mr. Kohberger, a person whose only connection to the case was his mode of transportation and shape of his eyebrows. The eyebrows come back. 2 identifications of little to no value. So this seems to be their reasoning for wanting everything thrown out. Am I right?
Well, this is one of the reasons, certainly, and the reason why is because they're arguing that it was the investigative genetic genealogy that led to the development of all the additional evidence against Bryan Kohberger. So it was because they identified him through this IGG process that then they got his DNA at the house in Pennsylvania, that they took these other steps, and so all of that would then be fruit of the poisonous tree that flowed from this pinpointing of him.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to this motion, and unfortunately, of course, we don't know what the basis is. We didn't get to see, of course, this particular one they filed under seal, but I am getting a couple of hints about it. So one, when this case first came about, there was still very little litigation of investigative genetic genealogy during ongoing, active criminal investigations at that point in time. It's been a couple of years now, so there has been more case law that's developed about that. Unfortunately, most of that is not in the defendant's favor at this point in time, because the sticking point in all of this is always standing. And so there's an idea that a defendant he only gets to challenge violations of his own constitutional rights. He doesn't get to say, hey, the rights of all these other people were violated, and therefore I should get the benefit of that. And so the problem with the investigative genetic genealogy is that if it is a search, if they like violated the terms of service, unlawfully access stuff, if these are even types of profiles that shouldn't necessarily be available to law enforcement because of the massive amount of personal information that they reveal, that's not really his interest. That's the rights of the third parties in the database that have been violated. They have their own remedies for that, potentially. I mean, they don't really, but the reality is that it's going to require more than likely some type of legislative fix to protect the information in these types of databases. And that is something that I will just say, this should be extremely concerning to people, because the whole underpinning of DNA as evidence in court, and that being allowed and being permissible, and it being totally fine to just go out and pilfer your cup out of the trash and get your DNA from it and stuff like that, is this idea that the conventional testing that they've always done, this STR testing, the information they get about it is very limited, and it's not coding data. And so what that means is that they're just specific spots on the genome that provide information about identity, but they don't tell you anything else about that person, what their hair color is, what their race is, are they obese, what's their family history, stuff like that you can absolutely get so much more of that information through the S&P technology. That's what's used for investigative genetic genealogy. That's the whole reason people put their DNA in these databases, right? Because you can get interesting info. You can get health info. Am I more at risk of breast cancer? Am I more at risk of Alzheimer's? What's my ancestry like, racially and so forth. So it's a massive amount of information that's now available that was really not contemplated at the time when the courts were saying, oh yeah, DNA, it's totally fine, no real privacy interest there because it's minimal information anyway. So we don't know exactly what his basis is. If he's just challenging investigative genetic genealogy on the basis of how the investigation was conducted, whether he should have a privacy interest in the DNA that belongs to third parties in the database, that's probably going to be a no. I mean, that's been the consistent result that we've gotten from the courts that have looked at it so far. But there do seem to be other issues with it as well. There is a hint in these pleadings that there is a curtilage problem. This is something I called out on day one when we started seeing these warrants come out. And the reason why is because
what's curtilage?
So yeah, I'm going to walk
people.
So, the curtilage is the areas of the home that are outside the home but are so intimately associated with it that they are entitled to basically the same type of protection as inside the home. And so what this basically means is in the trash context, which is where this is important, because police can generally go get something. If you've thrown something in the trash, you've put it out at the curb, it's ready for the garbage to be picked up. There is a lot of case law that says you've abandoned that. You no longer have any interest in it. You've put it out there in the public for where anybody could access it. So there's no longer any expectation of privacy in that garbage. The problem is if you haven't taken it out at the curb and it's still up there next to your house in this curtilage area, you are still entitled to have that protection. And so the reason why this caught my attention is because when we saw the warrant that came out of Whitman County, the one for his apartments and everything at WSU, there was this bizarre disclaimer in it that I've never seen in my entire life, where they basically said, they go through the whole same story that we've heard as far as the probable cause that was generated to date, and then they added in that they had been able to match his DNA, or the DNA that they got from the trash came back as being the likely father of the person whose DNA was found on the knife sheath, and so they then said, we're telling you this in the interest of full disclosure, which may be ironic depending on what comes out in this Frank's motion. We're telling you all this in the interest of full disclosure, but we don't actually want you to consider this DNA evidence as part of the probable cause because, maybe if it gets found to be unconstitutional, but found to be like inadmissible, then we don't want you to have based your probable cause decision based on that. So it was a real big tell that there was an obvious problem here that was so significant that like it even caught the prosecutor's attention to be like, we better not worry about that. So the curtilage problem was the obvious one that really came to mind there. And there's been some language in some of these motions that does tend to suggest that may be an issue, that the garbage was not at the curb, it was in the driveway, in the house, in the gated community. And so that's potentially one of the things that they're going to litigate.
Okay, so I believe that they went and found some source of DNA for him after the fact to, what do you call it? Construct. There's a word for constructing the case after the fact, when you have potentially gone and gotten some information unlawfully or unconstitutionally. I can't remember what it is, scaffolding or something like that. But
Mr. Rosie was calling it retrofitting, which I thought was apt.
Yeah. Okay, so what concerns me is even if there is some wiggle room with all this, if potentially if some of these motions here have, like the judge entertains some of them, is it just the death penalty that may be taken off the table, for example? Like, is that a bargaining chip at the moment, rather than just the actual evidence being suppressed?
I mean, there's not really a limit on the party's ability to bargain. That could be potentially unusual to do something like, we're going to still go to trial, but we'll take we'll stipulate to excluding this evidence, and we'll take the death penalty off the table if you don't challenge everything else. That would be unusual, but off the top of my head, there's not anything wrong with doing that. Even if there is a constitutional violation, defendants can waive that. You can always waive constitutional rights that you have. It just has to be knowing, intelligent, and voluntary. So, I mean, it's conceivable, but it definitely would be a very unusual state of affairs.
Can I be clear, Andrea? Do you think that there has been a constitutional violation here, or are you on the fence?
I don't know. I mean, we don't know. That's just part of the whole problem here. There's certainly hints that there's a problem here, that there's a significant enough problem that they were concerned about it from day one. Now, what exactly that is, I don't know. But that was really my biggest guess, was that they went and got the trash out of his driveway in the gated community without getting a warrant. And so that, yes, is potentially a constitutional violation. And then anything that flows from that continues to be a problem. There's potentially, constitutional violations in terms of Brady, not disclosing exculpatory evidence, potential issues with, due process in terms of, did they really play fast and loose with the CSLI data? Like, that's a big problem. You don't get to fabricate evidence against defendants. So there are certainly implications that there may be issues here, but we just don't have a full enough picture of the situation to really be able to say for sure one way or the other.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's go one step further. If it's found that there has been a constitutional violation, and that's ruled as being sustained, then what happens?
So the evidence that was obtained as the result of that constitutional violation is suppressed, and that includes just not only, like, say it's a warrant, one of the warrants is found to be invalid for some reason. It's not just the evidence from that warrant, it's any evidence that was obtained from using that evidence that was in the warrant as well, is all potentially tainted. And so that's the house of cards element to the case, because depending on, assuming hypothetically there is a problem, the question is really where and at what point, because the earlier in the investigation, the more significant a mistake like that is likely to be in terms of the downstream effects that it had. And so that's where you get into a situation where there's just so much that would have to be suppressed as a result of the constitutional violation that it's not feasible to proceed with the prosecution.
This is the thing. This really is it, isn't it? Like, this could be the moment this case dies against Bryan Kohberger. Like, yeah, media will lose their mind if it gets tossed, absolutely. But if these motions are successful, this really could be the end of Idaho versus Kohberger. Am I wrong, or?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. That's certainly on the table. Now, the likelihood of that happening, is a different question. I think, like you said, the trace DNA is such a significant part of the entire case that, honestly, even if they had nothing else, I think they would probably go to trial just on that.
Oh yeah,
and so
they would.
That's going to be the real question, is that piece of evidence going to be able to survive? The IgG evidence, or the IgG investigation in and of itself, in the abstract, probably isn't going to be a basis to be able to get that tossed. But is there, enough from the circumstances? It's just, until we get to those motion hearings, and hopefully they will be a little bit less circumspect when we actually are in the courtroom and they're trying to explain the justification for the arguments that they're making. We just don't know.
Well, yeah, that's the 22nd and 23rd of January, I believe, and
yes.
I don't know whether that will be an open hearing or not. There's so much
that is constitutionally required to be an open hearing. So this is an area where there is really not room for dispute. Motions to suppress have been held by the U.S. Supreme Court to be they're parts of the process to which the public has a right to attend. So it is required to be an open hearing, and expect there to be a problem if they tried to close it.
Well, unless it were Judge Gull, and she'd be like, stuff yous all.
Yeah,
Too bad. You're not coming in with your cameras. Yeah, wow, that's interesting, because there's so much that's under seal. Maybe they'll have to sort of stop and do some in-camera stuff. I don't know. But
yeah, that is possible. I mean, that's kind of that's the big open question, as to what extent can they just kind of deal with it behind the scenes, or, have an arrangement where just what is said in open court is minimized.
Yeah, absolutely. And right, truth and transparency, Lana, I've been saying the same thing. You've been waiting 1.5 years for this. Same, right? Like, I keep saying, this is not going to trial. This is not going to trial. Like, Anne Taylor is going to find a way. She is documenting this so well. Everything the state's been doing, she has been documenting every little move they've been making so well. And there's been so much shady stuff going on that she's just waiting for a moment. And the other day, when the deadline for motions to suppress came up, there was a bunch of us all just sitting there waiting for those documents to drop. And
I was one of them.
Yeah. And then they did.
Give me the
and
motion.
I was like, hey, here we go, people. It's on. And didn't disappoint. So, look, I don't want to get my hopes up too much, but here's the reason. I don't think he stands a chance at trial. Just don't think he stands a chance at trial. I think he's the wrong guy. I think he is the wrong guy. He would have to be Superman to have carried out those murders and not have left a trace of himself in that house, and to have not had a trace of those people in his car, in his apartment, on his person, anything at all, even a month or two later. I just think it's impossible. I don't see how that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe in the lack of evidence being evidence. That's a big one for me. When I see that there is nothing of that person in that place, for me that's just huge. Unless the state can find it.
And that's something actually too that I would say I've used that argument before in reasonable doubt cases as well, where the absence of evidence where logic would lead you to assume evidence should be is a potential reason for you to doubt it. Now, again, this kind of comes into conflict with absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. But sometimes it can be, like if your car isn't on the route where it's supposed to be, according to the state, then that is evidence that the theory is not explanatory. It doesn't give you the answer to the version of events that you're being asked to make decisions about. So yeah, I think it is very important and valuable to remember that as part of reasonable doubt. If you would expect evidence to be there and it's not there, yeah, that's something you can and should consider in deciding if the state's met their burden.
That's the thing. And so but it didn't work with Richard Allen. So here's the thing. So I was just going to bring up Lana's. So Lana said he can get a fair trial if this stuff is tossed like it should be. No, I don't think so. I disagree. I'm too jaded. I'm too jaded. Well, I mean, fair as in the as in terms of maybe it won't be appellate worthy, but in terms of him being found not guilty because of the lack of reasonable doubt, I don't think so, because look at what just happened. Look at what just happened. I don't believe that's the case. With RA it didn't work. No.
Yep.
So I think they'll convict him on that transfer DNA. They will. So that it won't, I don't think any degree of explanation as to how transfer DNA works will be enough to stop them from convicting the bad man.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's just another unfortunate reality shows up in the studies that jurors tend to not really credit expert testimony. That's going to be the situation where he's absolutely going to have an expert witness who's going to, explain how all this stuff works, explain the science behind the transfer DNA, what they're able to know from it. Might even talk about the Lucas Anderson case, right? The very high profile example of where a man was charged based on transfer DNA being found under the dead man's fingernails. And it wasn't because he was at the scene. It's because paramedics who took him to the hospital then responded to the crime scene and recovered the body. So like they'll be able to present all of this theoretical type of information about it. But that in a vacuum, the studies show jurors just tend to not put a lot of credibility in that. They expect experts to be hired guns for the party that's presenting them. And so it just kind of goes back to this concern that unless the defense is able to show a specific pathway for how his DNA could have gotten on that knife sheath without him being, involved in these murders, it's going to be a tough hurdle to overcome, even though legally it shouldn't be.
And it's not even the weapon. That's the other thing. People keep referring to it as the weapon. I've never been hurt by a piece of leather before. Well, hang on. No, I haven't. that sounded bad. Okay. Crypto tax lawyer, sorry. Hey, Hell and AB. Two thoughts on this is back to Richard Allen. One, why haven't we heard from jurors? Gag order? ? And two, denial of your writ ?
Yeah. So as far as why we haven't heard from the jurors, the gag order, to my knowledge, it does not apply to the jurors, nor would it. When they were released from their service, they are released from their oath to not discuss the case with anybody. So, and they were even specifically told you can't be compelled to talk about your decision or anything like that, but you are not prohibited from doing that. So they are in theory free to come forward. It's just that they may not want to do that for a whole variety of reasons. We saw the same thing with Depp v. Heard. Like, everybody wanted to hear from the jurors, right? At the same time, there's a lot of loonies out there, with the fixation on the case, and it potentially puts a target on your back to be out there in public, sort of representing the decision that was made. So I can certainly understand why, from personal reasons, they may simply prefer to not be made public and go about their lives. As far as the denial of my writ, yes, we got the order today. It was a summary order. They didn't tell me why the writ was denied, just basically that it doesn't meet the standard for an original action. So that is that. It's the end of the road. They even put specifically in the order, this is final, and you can't ask to reconsider it or appeal it or anything like that.
Final.
So yeah, that's where we're at. That's the state of public access in Indiana.
Hey, how did it feel to be called pro se?
It was fine. I mean, I don't care. It was. That's how I presented it and presented myself. So
it was cute though. Andrea Burkhart, pro se.
Pro se.
I just really liked the typography. I really liked the script. I thought it was beautiful. I appreciate nice fonts and typography. So I was just like, oh, that's pretty. But yeah, Shane, what did we expect though? Really?
Yeah.
What did we expect? You had to try. It was a lovely motion for writ of mandamus.
Well, thank you.
What do you call it? A petition for writ of mandamus. That's right. I read it out on this channel actually, and it was cool. The things in it about the real media or the mainstream media having access to the exhibits for 15 minutes at the end of each day. Yeah, I didn't know that. That was ridiculous. Yeah,
no basis for that whatsoever in any type of law, rule, constitution, nothing.
No,
but that was the rule, that some animals were more equal than others when it came to them.
And I wonder why, hey?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do you think she chose the mainstream media to have their 15 minutes with the exhibits as opposed to everybody else?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Well, the media gets at best a 30-second slot to be able to report the details of the day. So there's simply no way they're going to go into the type of level of detail that folks like me and Lawyer Lee and Bob and Ali Mata were doing. So, if your goal is to squelch the public interest and the transparency of your process, then yeah, you would give it to the people that are least likely to actually spend time talking about it.
Yeah, I figured because I asked my chat that day that I read out your document, and they tend to be more state friendly. The mainstream media, they tend to just and give you sound bites as well. Mm-hmm. So sure, they'll have their 15 minutes to look at the exhibits, and they'll walk away, and they'll give you just the pieces that Judge Gull would be more likely to be okay with. You guys would probably really milk your 15 minutes with those exhibits, wouldn't you? And we'd all hear about it. Yeah, you take many notes.
I did take a lot of notes.
Exactly, you did, yeah. Okay, so AKA the Cat Lady says, thank you for your super chat. Is it possible that the future of defense is in crowdsourcing info from the public, especially from the true crime community?
Well, I think, frankly, it would be sort of foolish for defendants to overlook that as a resource. If you have the type of case that's getting that kind of attention, it's free investigation for you. Now there's a burden that comes with that because you have to have the personnel and the time and everything to be able to sort through it, to be able to identify, follow up on things, to know, okay, this one is legit. There's something here that's worth pursuing. This one isn't. This one's a crank. Whatever those types of decisions are that need to be made. But yeah, you need to be looking at all the information that's available. And so I see it as a resource for defense teams if they're able to solve that problem of just managing how do you handle it, how do you sort through it, how do you organize it, how do you prioritize what you do with that information. But there's so much that social media has been able to uncover. I mean, we even just saw, for example, with this white van, he mentions a van, and Brad Weber says he drives home in a white van. And like within 24 hours, the internet has discovered, all these different instances of the white van showing up like on social media. And then even in I saw the helicopter, the helicopter footage from the news crew that was, flying over the scene during the search, and they fly over Brad Weber's house, and there's his white van.
There's a white van
right down there. So,
well, I'll be
all of this potential stuff that's out there, that collectively all of these different minds have the ability to come up with that one person sitting down trying to investigate the case on their own just can't possibly match that.
Thank you for that. And we have Bridget Wainwright says, thank you for the super chat. Joining late, Delphi. There is public knowledge of screams at 2 a.m. the night of. People called 911. If there's a police or 911 report, would that be Brady? Delphi?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question, because the answer to this one, I think, is going to come down to the timeline, the credibility of the state's timeline, and how broad do we interpret exculpatory evidence. So Brady basically says that any material that's in the possession of the state or the state's agents that tends to exculpate the defendant, tends to prove that they did not commit the crime, they have to turn that over as a matter of due process. It doesn't matter if it's already out there in the public. It doesn't matter if the defense has other ways of being able to get that information. If they have it, they're required to turn it over. The problem is that what is considered to be exculpatory can then be extremely narrowly defined. And so I can certainly see a situation where a court would be like, well, but no, because the time frame of the murders was between, 2:30 and 3:30 or whatever, that screams later on in the evening aren't necessarily proving, they don't disprove the state's theory, so they're not necessarily exculpatory. Absence of proof that it does in fact involve the crime that we're here investigating for purposes of this trial, could be something unrelated. There's just this tendency to burden shift onto the defendant to prove, what it is, the effect it would have had at the trial, and to just otherwise require it to be, so directly on point that it can't really be denied. That I think there's potentially a lot of ways for a court to get around finding this Brady evidence. That said, in my opinion, should it be turned over if it exists? Absolutely, of course. And it undermines the integrity of your investigation if you don't do that.
And you risk having an Alec Baldwin moment.
Yeah.
I still can't believe that happened. But
that was wild. It
was a wild, wild moment. And it makes you think you have to be super duper rich to afford a lawyer who can find something like that, a piece of evidence that's held back. So really, I mean, in that situation, it was some rounds that were given to law enforcement by a third party. And Mr. Spiro, New York lawyer, found out that that piece of evidence was kept from the defense, and they only found out about it a day before trial, on the day of trial, and the case was dismissed with prejudice, which means that the defendant walks, and that's the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a straight out Brady violation. And I've said all along that it will take something like that, or something like these motions to suppress, for Mr. Kohberger to walk. Unfortunately, because I don't think he's going to be found not guilty by a jury, sadly. But that's just me being glass half empty. Yeah. Okay. Claude Simeon, hello. Thank you for the super chat. Andrea, what kinds of evidence argument helped your clients be found not guilty? RA guilty on such flimsy grounds. Love seeing you. You're awesome. Aww. She's a bit awesome, isn't she?
Boy, so this is a bit of a tough one. So one thing that has been a common theme for me, I like to put my clients on the stand when that is at all possible. It's one of those things where, again, the jury is going to be instructed that they're not required to, and you can't hold it against them if they don't. But it's just, I recognize it's human nature. They want to know. They want to hear from this person that's sitting next to me. So I do that, a fair amount. If I can put my client on the stand and they can honestly say, I'm innocent and here's why. I have done that in situations where conventional wisdom would say don't do that. For example, I did it in a failure to register case. Okay, that means my client has been convicted of the type of crime that you don't normally, want to have in front of a jury because they have all kinds of bad assumptions about it. But I put my client on the stand. It was an issue of credibility between him and the law enforcement that he got his instructions about how to register from. The jury believed him. They acquitted him.
Wow.
Other situations I can think of, typically it's just when you can highlight. It's so hard for me to say because it's so hard to know what a jury thinks about and what really drives their decision-making process. The very first case that I tried, I got an acquittal, and it was a case where my client was charged with basically driving without a valid license, driving while he had a suspended license. It was a situation where he'd had prior convictions, and so if he got convicted, it was going to be significant consequences for his license. Doesn't sound like a huge thing, but honestly, like when you're trying to get to work and support your family and stuff like that, these can be these can have serious consequences. Yeah. So anyway, we had it was his girlfriend who testified for us in that particular case. She was in the car with him. Her testimony was she had been driving the car. The weather conditions were bad. The car basically slid off towards the edge of the road. And so she got out, and the defendant was basically trying to help her get the car, out of the ditch, more or less, and back onto the road. And that's the point when the police came upon the scene. So I don't know exactly why they decided it the way that they did. Did they decide, well, that means he's not driving within the meaning of the rule? Did they decide, well, we don't want to discourage a guy from trying to help out his girlfriend in that kind of situation, so even if it is driving, we're not going to convict him? I don't know. It's just it's hard to pinpoint the jury's decision making, and a lot of times they consider things that I didn't really consider to be significant issues in the case at all. I think a lot of times, honestly, you're just getting lucky. And like I said, I put a lot of attention into the jury selection process, and then trying to make sure I'm picking people who are going to be receptive to me and are going to be receptive to alternative ways of looking at the evidence. So I would probably give that more credit than really anything else.
Yeah, that I'm still getting past the fact that what my co-host Dali Talk said. Holy shit! First case acquittal. What?
This is also the one where there was a retired sheriff deputy that I left on the jury, and so it's because it's my first trial. So my supervisor is there in the courtroom. He's not like telling me what to do or anything, but he's just supervising. And I leave this guy on the jury because I liked him. We had a good conversation during the jury selection, and the supervisor's like, "Andrew, what are you doing? You out of your mind? You can't leave that guy on the jury." I'm like, "No, I think he'll be good. I think he'll be good." He ended up being the person and delivered the acquittal. So I think there's a lot of gut with that type of thing that people should trust their gut more when it comes to connecting with the people that are going to decide your case.
Look, I mean, I know people who know me well, watch this channel well a lot, know that I am quite a fan of Jose Baez, and Jose Baez was very much praised by the judge in the Casey Anthony case for connecting with the jurors. So the one thing that he said that he did extremely well was he fashioned his case towards those jurors. He didn't he didn't just put his case forward. He got to know each of those jurors, because it was a long trial, got to know each of those jurors, and he connected with every single one of them, and he fashioned every word to those jurors. So regardless of what you think of that lawyer or that case, he did very well. He got the outcome that he wanted.
That's another one of those areas where there's studies that support, as horrifying as it is, the idea that jurors decide the case very early on, like sometimes even during opening statements, before they hear any evidence at all. And it's not based on the strength of the evidence or anything like that. It's based on who do they like and who do they not like.
Yeah, exactly. And
so try not to be dislikable as a lawyer in court. You know, that can be a problem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but some people say, oh well, lawyers are meant to be unlikable, like they're not likable characters. Well, that's not true. Like if the jurors have to like you, like they have to feel like you're telling them the truth, like that you're a genuine person. Otherwise, they're not going to connect with your story. And look, I know that was a really divisive case, and a lot of people think that that was the wrong decision by the jury. But the defense attorneys there were doing their job, just like defense attorneys do, and it's just one of those things. They have to do their best to find to convince the jury that there's reasonable doubt, and he did a really good job of that. There's no question. Okay. So next one, we have another one. Sorry, one more from the Crypto Tax Lawyer. Don't say sorry. It's cool. I don't get lots and lots of super chats around here, so it's really nice here. Sorry, one more. Now you're talking my language. Crowdsourcing defense. Blockchain will revolutionize crim justice and how evidence is documented and stored. Stay tuned. Writing a piece on it now. Ooh,
can't wait.
Interesting.
Send me the link when you publish that. I'm definitely interested in that.
That sounds way cool. Excellent. All right. And Dali Talk, who's also known as Ilya Talk, by the way, he's recently transitioned his name. So if next time you come on, you'll get to meet him. He's my co-host of over a year. Lovely guy. Don't judge him. I still suffer from that Baldwin moment. He tried to cover the Baldwin case, and
I understand.
3 days in, and did you try and cover that one or not?
We did. This was one we did as a panel. So I was on with
that's right.
Oh, Nate the lawyer was there, and Danny was there. I can't remember who else, and
Joe,
so now I'll get hammered for not remembering who popped in and out. But yeah, we had a few different people that were covering that case, and it was surprising. That was a pretty surprising moment.
That's right. I went
Wasn't
on to
expecting that
Andrew's
ruling.
channel
It's
for a
such a
little
rare
bit.
thing to happen.
Yeah, I remember Andrew Brunker. Remember him watching him, and he was like, "No, it's not over yet. It's not over yet." Oh, yeah, it's over.
Yeah. Yeah, it's over. It was
Yeah,
definitely over.
it was a moment there. Okay, and thank you to John Comment for the 5 memberships. Thank you so much. You're awesome. And to David for the 10. David, you're a Lego partner, Andrea. There,
Oh yeah,
10.
yeah. I still have my Himeji castle at home. It's proudly displayed in my living room.
Lovely. Yeah, I went on his Lego stream the other day, but I don't have any Legos, so too bad. Um, Hi, David. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the 10 memberships. That's really sweet of you. Berry says, if you want to see some shifty state work, Kaliev Browder, what's this? Held in Rikers for 3 years. What? 800 days
Yeah.
solitary for stealing a backpack. DA kept delaying the trial. That is terrible.
Yeah, I think I've heard about this one. There's been several cases out of New York, and I think out of Rikers in particular, where yeah, the pretrial delays are just insane, and it's turned speedy trial into a fiction because it just doesn't really exist, and there are very limited ways to be able to push that forward without just sitting the process through so that you can have the trial, which you need to have in order to preserve your right to appeal. If you plea bargain, if you plea out, you typically waive your right to be able to appeal. And so what happens is people languish and languish and languish until they're finally given some type of offer that will get them out. And they're like, yes, that's my concern at that point in time is just getting my freedom back. So it's a very appalling state of affairs.
It happens so often, and then that's it. They've got a guilty plea. They have a conviction. That's it. It's
And
done.
no vindication of the rights of the person who was held under those conditions that they shouldn't have been.
No, exactly. And you can't really blame them for wanting to get their life back, really, can
Of course
you?
not. Yeah, no, of
No.
course not.
And Claude Simeon again in Indiana, jury instructions seem biased to not guilty, but hidden traps or just ignored. You started to say something about that, but was there more?
Well, so I'm actually, if you're not following my Substack, go check out my Substack because I've
Yeah.
got a whole bunch of like follow up stuff in the works from Delphi. And so one of the things that I'm looking at is I'm looking at the Indiana jury instructions, and I want to compare them to some of the observations that were made in this law review article that I mentioned. It's a California Law Review article that came out about 2017 or 2018, where they did this very comprehensive review of instructions, jury instructions on reasonable doubt, looked at what some of the good ones are, looked at what some of the bad ones are, and looked at what some of the traps are and how things are worded and how they might sound good, but then actually when you think about it and how they get applied, it has a tendency to burden shift, or it has a tendency to reduce the burden and stuff like that. So I want to sit down and do like a breakdown of the Indiana jury instruction on reasonable doubt with that type of perspective in mind. So I'll be able to give you a much more like comprehensive answer in that context. But I agree, my knee-jerk reaction to the Indiana instructions were like, wow, this seems really good, especially compared to what we have to deal with over here in Washington. We don't get anything like a lot of this favorable language. So
But yeah, do they listen? That's the question. Does it just go
yeah.
like that? Yeah. Andrea's Substack link is right there. Andrea, a few people are asking, what is a Substack? What do you do on a Substack? Do you see on a
So
Substack?
Substack, it's blogish, but what it is it's an email newsletter, and so what it does is it's just basically a way to sign up for written, like long form stuff that I do. I find it very helpful for things that are a little bit more analytical, a little bit more like comparative to legal work, to what I do as a lawyer, to evaluate this is what the standard is, this is how it applies in this situation, and stuff like that. It just works better for me than trying to do stuff like that on YouTube or through a visual type of medium. So it's an email newsletter. You can sign up. I do have paid subscriptions, but I don't limit my content to just paid subscribers. I put a lot of stuff out for free, and I'll be doing that with a lot of this Richard Allen stuff as well.
Yeah, it's awesome, guys. You need to be on it. I am subscribed to it, and I get emails from Andrea, and I'm like, oh, Andrea's emailing me. Oh, it's her Substack. Oh, that's okay. So yeah, make sure that you're on that. The link's right there. I find it really interesting that you're like, oh, I find it easier to use a Substack than make a video, and I'm like, I read it and I'm like, you find it easier to write like this? Oh my
But that's
God.
been my life. I mean, that's been my life for almost 20 years. You know, I can spit out 50 pages in a day. You know, that's the routine of an appellate lawyer. So yeah, the writing for me is a very intuitive process, much more than trying to create something that's like visually appealing and works as an oral
It's kind of easier
presentation
for me
and
to
all
do
that.
this. Yeah. Just a couple other things. So, Lana says, have you learned anything from Delphi in terms of asking jury questions in voir dire? Sounds like she's pretty good at it, actually.
I mean, you know, the voir dire process, it was so constrained here with their time limitations that they had, the kind of the way that certain of those questions were just kind of dealt with by the court and then summarily left. And so there's a lot that you would want to follow up on, at least I would have wanted to follow up on. But it's hard to do that in that type of context. Anytime you have a time limit on your ability to question the jurors, it just becomes a real challenge to prioritize what's going to be the most important thing. In jury selection, you want to, while you're getting to know the jurors, also be talking and kind of educating them on some of these foundational principles. And you want to be able to do that in a way that helps you understand how they're going to apply that, and to kind of, to the extent you can, sort of get a commitment from them that they're going to stick with that. That just can be very, very difficult to do in a situation where you got to work out things like, you know, personal conflicts that they may have with people, or just, you know, they ended up being very focused on hardship type of stuff. And I mean, it's not that they didn't have those types of conversations, but like, you can only have them with so many jurors. You know, there's an entire panel that you need to talk to, but you don't get to have that one-on-one conversation with everybody. So it was another situation where the deck was kind of stacked from the beginning, because there wasn't really going to be a way for them to ask everything that they would really want to ask to make sure that they're getting the best jurors.
Cool. And just sleuthy goosey, she asked this earlier, and I started because it's interesting. Andrea, do you think we should have professional jurors?
This is such a tough question. I can't even tell you how hard this is, because I really do buy into the concept of the jury being the last real bulwark that we, the people, have against a tyrannical government. This is like the one place in our government where we are directly in charge of justice. And so I hate the idea of giving that up. But I'm also not blind to the problems, you know, that we have from this type of system, and just the kind of realities of working with it. You know, something that has come to several people have brought to my attention recently, and it's something I've been a little bit familiar with in the past. Just other jurisdictions, of course, have different ways of handling these types of questions. And so Germany has been brought up to me a lot. And Germany has this they have a system where it's a combination of, you have judges, but you also have jurors. They are professional jurors, so not lay people. But the judges also serve a dual role where they're not just there to passively receive information and decide based on whatever the parties present. They're actively involved in the investigation. They can decide, we want to subpoena people, we want to bring in witnesses and stuff like that. I can see an advantage to more of a mixed type of system like that, because you could potentially diffuse, dilute some of these problems that you have with lay jurors and the kind of knee-jerk decision making and stuff like that, but also just focusing on it a little bit more, maybe as well. The truth-seeking process, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. There's no question about it. I can see real advantages to it. I can see real downsides to it. I think the bottom line is that no matter what system you use, there's going to be trade-offs involved. So I can't say I want to have professional jurors, but I certainly understand the perspective of people who think that that would get us more just results.
What if, because I was thinking about this the other day, I was thinking about like how jurors or everybody, they don't have access to a standard, easy to digest educational resource about what is the burden of proof, what is beyond a reasonable doubt, what does that mean, right? And I understand that it's not, it's actually not defined, and that's a problem. I feel like that in itself is a problem. Maybe there needs to be a version for every state. I don't know if it's that simple, but why is there no educational resource? Like, why can I'm an Australian, I can't go and search up US reasonable doubt meaning and get something simple to explain to me what that is? How difficult can it possibly be? And so a juror has to rely on the people in the courtroom to tell them what it means, and it may not even be okay for the defense attorney to say what it means, because the judge might say, no, you can't say that, right? I'm not going to let you. Or the defense attorney might not be very good at explaining it. They may explain it in a really trivial sense, right? So all of these things, people talk to me in my life the other day, we used to have civics classes, right? Sleuthy said to me that her child is having some civics classes. I'm sure Sleuthy's child will know a lot more about this stuff than most kids, But why is there no educational resource? Why can't, if you're walking into jury selection, could there be a thing that people see, like a video or something, that just makes it really clear for people? Is it that far-fetched for something like that?
It's not that far-fetched. I think the reality, though, is just that it is a very elusive concept to be able to define. We all know that it's meant to be a very high standard, but how to articulate that in a way that says more than just the words themselves is where the challenge is. I mean, in theory, the resource that you're describing is the jury instructions. I mean, that's why we're supposed to have them. But I think you also make a very good point that the jury instructions aren't always all that helpful. And so then it ends up kind of being on the parties to help walk the jurors through what does that mean in general, and what does that mean in the context of the particular case. And so it puts a little bit too much weight as far as the outcome goes on the skill of the lawyer. And that's not what justice should be. Justice should not be, dependent on somebody's ability to come up with the best analogy for the situation. That's a horrifying way to try to decide cases. So I think in theory, your idea is sound. I think the reality is just that's what courts and committees that create these types of pattern instructions, that's what they've struggled with from time immemorial, is how do you really capture what this means in a simple and easy to apply way.
That's the thing. If it's so hard for the courts to understand what it means, how's the regular layperson supposed to understand what the hell it means? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. And then the
there's a
problem is that
problem.
it just ends up meaning kind of what they want it to mean. Like you mentioned before, a very common way to talk about reasonable doubt is to try to put like numeric qualities to it, right? Preponderance of the evidence is 51%, clear and convincing, 60, 70, maybe something like that. Reasonable doubt. Where do you put that number? And so, there's no law that says where the number should be. It just kind of ends up becoming a matter of discretion. When you ask jurors, where do you put the number for beyond a reasonable doubt? One study that I saw looked at anywhere from between like 40% to 99%, and the mean was about 85%.
What?
Is that enough? Is 85%
No.
enough? I don't know. If I got a 50% doubt, that's pretty substantial. That's like 1 in 6 chance that I'm getting it wrong, So it's very, very hard to put things in practical terms that are easy to apply and that everybody agrees. Yeah, that's correct. That's accurate. That's an accurate representation of what the standard is.
Um, you sent me something actually earlier, and I just wanted to read one line from it. It Jurors need to feel okay with if you are not sure and certain of his guilt, you must find him not guilty. So if you are not sure and certain of his guilt, if you're not sure and certain, then you must find him not guilty, right? So this whole idea of being allowed to find someone not guilty, even if you're pretty sure that he's guilty, I think there's something missing in people's minds, that it's all right to let that person be not guilty, even if you kind of think he's guilty, right? Like this idea of letting that person go when you have doubts, I think that doesn't sit well with some people.
I think you're right. And I think a lot of times just doubt in general is uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable position for people, a lot of people to be in. They want to resolve doubts. They want to have answers. And so even if that means we're guessing at what the answer is, or what the answer probably is, it's just a more comfortable state psychologically for people to be in than saying, well, I guess we don't know and maybe we never will.
Hey, Mickey's headphones. What BS from Judge Hippler today? What's he done today? I haven't seen anything from him today.
I'm not sure. I haven't seen anything from him today either.
All right. I know that he wasn't very happy about the motion for leave.
He wasn't, but honestly, I don't think he was. I don't think he was really out of line with that. I mean, it was kind of a pro forma motion. They really didn't give a good explanation or justification. They didn't say like, what do we need to be able to move for, and why. So I think that it's probably still on the table if they do have something very specific that they need to file a motion on. I think they can still raise it and ask for leave. They just are going to need to put forward a little bit better of an explanation for why the circumstances justify not meeting that deadline.
Yeah. Okay, so Mickey's headphones, he straight up denied the motions to extend time. So that would be the motion for leave.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Andrea said, I actually didn't think that he was out of line with that one. He said it in a really grumpy tone.
Yeah, he did.
But he was right, like it was right on the deadline. So yeah, and judges don't like that. But he hasn't denied everything. Like he hasn't made any statement on the actual motions. So we'll see. I'm holding out hope that he's going to be okay. We don't know.
Yeah. Me too.
All right, cool.
Fingers crossed.
I think Miss Andrea has given us so much of her time, and we need to be really grateful. Thank you so much to Andrea. Wow, this has been fantastic. Thank you. Have I missed one? Phil the Gilbertian Biggs. If the jury is the ultima, shouldn't they also decide evidence admissibility, Andrea? Ooh.
So the reason why this is not the case is because generally speaking, the jurors don't decide what the law is. They just apply it to the facts that they're given. So now Indiana had that weird. I mean, to me, it was a very weird. Apparently, it comes from the Constitution here, provision that here the jurors decide the law as well as the facts. So they have this kind of door open to where even if you think the evidence proves him beyond a reasonable doubt, you can convict him, but you're not necessarily required to. Very different in Washington. In Washington, very clearly the law comes from the court. The jury's job is to decide the facts. So our jury instructions say if you find that the state's met its burden, it is your duty to return a verdict of guilty. So, I mean, I think that that's generally where it has its roots is this idea that there needs to be somebody who's got the legal background, the legal education to be able to decide some of those preliminary questions, particularly when it comes to the admissibility of evidence, because you can't unring the bell. You know, if the jury hears it, they've heard it. And so then it doesn't really matter if it's admissible or not at that point. They've heard it. It's going to have an effect. We'd like to think that it won't, but is that practically feasible? Like generally not. So
and truth and transparency, thank you for the super chat. Thank you, ladies, for your time and brains. Love the work put into the live with the slides. Oh, thank you. That's sweet.
I thought so too. That's so awesome.
It's just the way I think. Like I can't get my thoughts together properly unless I make all the things, and don't expect it every time, Andrea. just sometimes. But yeah, 2 cases and needed to show them visually next to one another, because I do think that there is some alignment between them. I feel like there's a reason we should be looking at them together, because I am worried. That the exact same thing is going to happen to Mr. Kohberger. I think they got the wrong guy. I really do. I don't see how it can be him at this point. And I'm open though. Like I am open to being wrong on that, and I think that it's important to have that reservation of judgment. And a lot of people come along, and I know they say this of you, Andrea, they say it of me. Less people know who I am, but they say it, and they say, oh, well, you think everyone's innocent. You just want to defend murderers, la la la. And actually, I want to reserve my judgment until I've heard everything. And at the moment, from what I can tell, I don't see how he can be the right guy, just based on what I see.
Yeah,
that's it.
Well, I'm very skeptical of the case at this point, with the full understanding that yes, there's a massive amount that we don't know, and we're going to have to wait until trial. But just the volume of what they had at the probable cause stage was really not overwhelming, and the direction that the case has gone since then is just not generally the direction you expect the case to go. If the defendant is in fact guilty, you expect there to be more and more corroboration of these basic points. And so to the folks who think that I think that everybody is guilty, I've got a few examples, or that everybody is innocent. Yeah. I've got a few examples for you of people that I think are probably guilty. Again, reserving judgment until trial, but just based on the evidence that's already out there in public. The Long Island serial killer, go look at his probable cause affidavit and compare that one to the one in Bryan Kohberger's case, and you can see the levels of corroboration for each independent fact that they're trying to establish. It's substantial. Very different situation than we have with Mr. Kohberger. For those of you saying, oh, well, the jury decided Richard Allen is guilty, great. I also think OJ did it. So, make what you want of that.
Absolutely. So it's not a matter of just blanketly everybody is being the victim of a corrupt system and it's all just a conspiracy and all that kind of thing. Absolutely not. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Everyone has that right to a fair trial and a just trial. Sometimes people are overcharged. That does happen, and it's worth questioning that. But that said, no, everything's not a conspiracy. In this case, and in the case of Richard Allen, I believe wholeheartedly that they had the wrong defendant. They had the wrong person. And in Mr. Kohberger's case, unless they bring out something that is just a shock to me, then I just think he's the wrong guy. I think he's the wrong guy. So, and it really bothers me that people make up their mind prior to seeing everything. And then they stick so much to it that it becomes an offense to them when you suggest the opposite. Being able to withhold judgment is a really important quality, I think, when you're watching these things play out. So, yeah, I would just challenge people who are very close-minded in one direction or the other to open up your mind to all the facts and just be ready to see the other side of it, because it's not over yet. It hasn't even started. Hasn't even started. Thank you so much, Andrea. This has been amazing. So cool. Next time, come on and we'll have a party. We'll have like come to the Christmas stream or something and can come and chill with everybody.
We'll do it. I'll definitely be back. It's been a lot of fun being here. I love this conversation. And so, yeah, we got to do it again.
Yay, absolutely. Okay, so now you're part of the club. So you're part of my lawyer club. So come on with Sean and Andrew and David and Nick and Steve, all the people who usually come and hang out with us. We have lots of fun. And obviously Ilya, my co-host, obviously. Well, his name's really Dali, but I call him Ilya now because he was an idiot and said that his middle name was Ilya, and so now I call him Ilya. That's it. That's it forever. There it is. Helen may meet the weirdo Dali Ilya. Yes. Andrea may meet. See, you're all tongue-tied because you're all like starstruck by Andrea being here. That's what it is. Yeah, he's going to sneak in the back way and be like, hey, how's it going? All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. I appreciate it. We'll let Andrea get some sleep and I'll get on with my day, I suppose. Time for the song. I have a song. I'll play it now. Her name was Helen. You get the lighters going. She got on YouTube and made some live streams. The co-host is Donnie and she dances sometimes. The words are Ilya? Because she's an 803. To be certain, excited ignorance. Aussie, yes, Aussie.